So I was thinking for today's video that we would do something a little bit more on the fun side. I've actually been thinking about doing this for quite a while, and I'm just now getting around to it. But the 80s was such a great decade to be a kid, to be a teenager, to be growing up in general, because there was a lot of great stuff going on with the music, the fashion, and you had the big hair, boom boxes, parachute pants, breakdancing, where's the beef? I want my MTV. Yeah, all good stuff. And in the world of fragrances, there was a lot of really, really nice fragrances released during that time. And so that's what this video is all about. We're going to go through 10 iconic fragrances from the 80s that I still have in my collection and that I still currently wear and enjoy. All right, so let's count our way backwards. We're going to start with the year 1989. In that year, the #1 song was Chicago's Look Away. Great song. And then the top movie at the box office was Michael Keaton's Batman. We also saw the release of this fragrance here, Eternity for Men by Calvin Klein. So yeah, Calvin Klein really tore it up in the 80s with their releases. Eternity was just one that I remember the first time that I smelled it. It was just like nothing that I'd ever tried before. There wasn't really anything else out there like it at the time. I mean, sure, there were a lot of aromatic fougères, but this one was just so clean, so fresh, so bright that it was, to me, very unique. The citruses, the lavender, sandalwood, sage, juniper, basil, and then a host of other ingredients. The first time that I smelled this, yeah, I mean, I was hooked. I threw my money at the woman behind the counter. I wanted a bottle. I didn't even care how hard I had to work for that summer vacation money. I just, take my money, take my money. But yeah, this one just has a lot of good memories tied to it. It still has the power to transport me back to another place in time. Over the years, I don't really see that the formulation, the performance has really changed, which is awesome. And I'm so glad that they've held on to this bottle design. I've always liked it, always thought that it was very classy, very masculine looking. And yeah, I love this one. It's a flanker monster. I mean, there have been so many flankers of the Eternity line. We've just seen the release of the clone version, which I just got my nose on the other day. Really, really nice. I look forward to adding that to the collection as well. So another fragrance from 1989 that I really feel like left its mark as far as originality is concerned is one that you don't hear talked about a whole lot. In fact, you'd probably ask the younger generation about it, and they probably don't even know of its existence. They probably have never heard of it. But I'm talking about Claiborne for Men by Liz Claiborne. Of course, Liz Claiborne, up until a certain point in time, was known primarily for being a clothing designer, especially for women's clothes. In the early 1980s, the brand branched out into men's clothing under the name Claiborne. And then they started releasing fragrances. 1986, they released Liz Claiborne for women. And then 1989, they released Claiborne for men. First of all, the bottle. The bottle just screams the 80s, doesn't it? I mean, the frosted glass here set down in the rubber, the black rubber base with the red cubed top. I mean, you just can't get any better than that. I love it. Similar to Eternity, this took a fresher route. Even though it's considered like a chypre fragrance, I tend to look at this one as being more of an aromatic too. It's based on lavender. You know, there's notes of melon and citruses. There's also green notes, oak moss, leather, cedar. But really, it's that melon note that sets this one apart, that makes it truly unique. This has been my go-to spring and summer forever. There was a period of time when after I finished my last bottle, I didn't go out and buy another one right away. And I truly regret that because in the meantime, it was reformulated. They've even changed the bottle. The glass part here now is clear. You're going to come across these every once in a while in the rack stores. It's horrible, guys. The reformulation is just, it's bad. So if you are interested in trying this one out, see if you can track down an older bottle. You can still pick those up pretty inexpensively. They're just, you know, kind of hard to find. I had to track this one down through Facebook. I did an ISO and did find a guy that had almost a full bottle. And I've barely put a dent in this one so far. But yeah, great fragrance from 1989. Truly love it. All right, 1988, the song of the year was George Michael's Faith. What an awesome song. But I need some time off from that emotion. Time to pick my heart up off the floor. Yeah. That was my impression of George Michael. Thank you. Thank you very much. 88 also gave us Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That was the top movie at the box office. And we got two fragrances that have really stood the test of time, that continue to be a lot of our favorites. How about this strange beauty here that we call Dior Fahrenheit? Yes, I wore this as my scent of the day recently, and I posted on Instagram how this was the very first fragrance that I purchased that I didn't buy it because I loved it, didn't even necessarily like it. I was intrigued by it. I was just fascinated by how different, how unique it was. And I can only imagine that the powers that be over at Dior, they were just like really biting their nails, waiting to see how this would be responded to, because it was so different from anything else out there at the time. But I guess the consumer, the market in general, was looking for something different because it was immediately embraced. And again, it continues to be well loved even to this day. Of course, Fahrenheit is known for having that strange petroleum smell to it. It's a smoky leather with violet lavender musk. It's a little woody, it's a little spicy, but it's that petroleum smell that just weirdly draws you in. It keeps you coming back for more. It's so strange that, you know, you can go to the gas station, gas up your vehicle, and accidentally get gas on you, like on your hand or something, and it's horrible. You can't wait to get home and scrub it off, but yet we will wear a fragrance that is reminiscent of that smell. I mean, how does that even work? Well, that's a subject for another day, I guess. But the bottle is absolutely amazing. I've always loved the bottle shape, the gradient color of it. Their marketing, their ad campaigns have always been on point. Yeah, Dior, they have reached a lot of milestones, a lot of pinnacles in their brand history, and definitely I consider Fahrenheit to be one of them. Moving on to another totally rad fragrance from 88, Davidoff's Cool Water. Of course you knew this would have to be on here. You talk about iconic fragrances from the 80s. I mean, Cool Water is the epitome of that, wouldn't you say? I mean, it was really a groundbreaking fragrance for the time, being an aquatic and having that seawater mint note in it. And then, you know, of course, it had the usual masculine ingredients like your lavender, tobacco, oak moss, musk. This is just, the love for this fragrance is just, I mean, unbelievable. And it's been a flanker monster just like CK Eternity. You know, in addition to having both the male-female lines and all the summer versions, they've had like Frozen, they've had Cool Wave, they've had what I call a spin-off called Hot Water. And most recently, they've come out with the intense version, which I'm still, you know, wondering about. I still question why that's even in existence. I mean, I like it, I've got it, but to me, it just has nothing to do with the rest of the line at all. But anyway, nothing really that has come along since has topped the original, that has got as much love as the original. From a marketing aspect, they've always done a great job. The ad campaigns have always featured like this aquatic, nautical type setting. You know, you've got the nice looking guy, but he's always been a relatable guy, you know? In fact, the most recent person they've had, you know, in their campaign is the guy from Lost, who my wife just happens to really love. And they've been using the tagline, the power of cool. And definitely when it comes to fragrances, I mean, you can't get any cooler than Davidoff Cool Water. In 1987, the Bangles had everyone walking like an Egyptian. Yeah. And Beverly Hills Cop ruled the box office. Also, 87 gave us two beast fragrances, one being Bijan for Men. This was released originally in 1981, but re-released this year, 87. And it actually went on to win the award for Men's Fragrance of the Year, Prestige, in 88. So it did very well. But Bijan is an oriental fougere that really takes no prisoners. It's very heavy on the oak moss and leather with clove, patchouli, honey. It's a scent that's not for everyone. You really have to be a big fan of really masculine beast mode scents. But it's probably one of the most unique, most memorable fragrances that you will smell. Once you smell this, you will never, ever forget it. And the bottle. Let's talk about the bottle. Probably one of the most unique to come out of the 80s. Not necessarily 80s inspired per se, but you know, I would actually say this is a little bit more Art Deco looking, but definitely looks good sitting on your shelf. This was reported to have been a favorite fragrance of both Sylvester Stallone and Bruce Willis. And you might remember, too, that it was featured in that hilarious episode of Friends where Joey was working as the Bijan spritzer guy at a department store. And he had that, you know, big rivalry with the ombre guy. Yeah, I almost forgot what he was. He was the ombre guy. But, yeah. Good stuff here. Again, not for everyone, but I just happen to really love it. Another beastly fragrance from 87 is Lapidus Pour Homme by Ted Lapidus. I can't believe that I was wearing this fragrance as a teenager. It was just way beyond my years, a little too mature, a little too in your face, but I loved it. I remember the only place you could really pick this up locally was at JCPenney. And I had a bottle. My brother, who is actually 2 years younger than I am, he had a bottle. He was wearing it. But it was just such an interesting combination of notes. You've got honey, incense, tobacco, pineapple, oak moss, lavender, rose, sandalwood, pine. It's just an atomic bomb of a fragrance, though. I mean, it's another one of those that either you love it or you absolutely hate it. There's really no in between, no middle ground. In looking back over some of the advertising and the campaigns, I was a little surprised at how racy some of them were. And of course, I probably would not have been aware of that at the time. In our little conservative town, definitely, they would not have been advertising those campaigns in the stores or whatever. The only place I possibly would have seen them would have been like in GQ magazine, but I don't really remember seeing any ads for this fragrance. I think that it didn't become very popular. It was kind of overlooked, but I thought it was a great fragrance. I still think it's a great fragrance. I still enjoy wearing it. And it's just one of those that when I spray it, it definitely takes me back. 1986 must have been a really off year for music because the top of the charts was that cheesy collaboration between Dionne Warwick, Stevie Wonder, Elton John, and I believe it was Gladys Knight. That's What Friends Are For. And the top movie at the box office was none other than Top Gun. And speaking of racy ads, the king of really pushing the envelope as far as that was concerned in the 1980s was none other than Calvin Klein. And especially with this fragrance here, Obsession. Yeah, again, living in the small conservative town that I lived in, I would never have seen those ads displayed in the stores. They always had the more toned down versions, definitely. I currently have just this small bottle after not having this in my collection for quite a while. Because really, I did see the need to have it because I do feel like it definitely takes its place among the icons of the 1980s. Even though the current formulation, I feel like really lacks the depth, the mysterious sweetness that I remember it having back in the day. But it's still a solid fragrance. It's definitely an Oriental style. A lot of amber, vanilla, cinnamon, other spices, some citrus. So I had two friends that I hung out with quite a lot during my teenage years, and one of them wore Obsession, but he didn't just wear it, he bathed in it. He always smelled so strongly of Obsession, you get in his car and it just reeked. So needless to say, I wasn't a huge fan of this fragrance back then. It wasn't until a few years later I was able to reintroduce myself to it in smaller doses, and I really found out. I mean, it's a very enjoyable fragrance, and I started wearing it more. But it's certainly one that made its mark in the 80s. I'm glad to have it back in my collection because I'm going to enjoy wearing it this fall. So 1985, the top song belonged to someone who was well on her way to becoming a true icon of the 80s and beyond. Of course, talking about Madonna, the song was Like a Virgin, and the top movie at the box office was Back to the Future. So this year introduced a fragrance that was to eventually become my very first big fragrance purchase, as in I went to a department store, I bought it from a lady behind the counter in lieu of buying it from the drugstore. So that's what I mean by that. But it's Perry Ellis for men. And before I go any further, I do want to explain that this version here that I'm talking about is what we now refer to as the original. It's referred to as a cologne for men. I say that because there is another version out there, and apparently they are two very different scents, so they can very easily be confused. But that one does come in a spray form, whereas this one is a splash with a twist-on, twist-off cap. Now, if you want more information about that other version, please check out Scents of South Jersey. Kellen goes into a little bit more depth about that fragrance in his recent fall list. Sounds like a great fragrance. It sounds like one that I would like, so I am going to check it out. But for the time being, we're going to be focused on this one here. This is a leather oak moss beast. This is probably what started my obsession with leather fragrances. It's very reminiscent of other fragrances like Knitza 10. In fact, I really feel like this probably took its inspiration from Knitza 10. It's very similar, but contains a whole lot of notes. I mean, I'm going to have to read these out because I just could not possibly remember all of them. But in addition to the leather and oak moss, it has rose, geranium, vanilla, amber, sandalwood, patchouli, vetiver, tonka, incense. There were some others that I didn't even put down here, and there is some civet. So again, I mean, what 15-year-old, because I was 15 at the time, what other 15-year-old was walking around wearing a fragrance containing civet? Me. But this was just such an awesome scent. This was an instant love for me. And I went through so many bottles of this. I really lost count. But you know, nowadays because this is in splash form, I do decant so that I can spray it on. But why this one doesn't get more love, it doesn't get talked about more, I just don't know, because I mean, to be honest, my 80s would not have been the same without it, without Perry Ellis Cologne for Men. 1982, we were getting physical with the beautiful Olivia Newton-John. And the movie that year, the top movie, was Out of This World, literally, because it featured a very weird-looking alien called E.T. that just wanted to go home. And Drakkar Noir was the fragrance star of 82. And, I mean, truthfully, it was a bit of an alien itself. I mean, it was another aromatic fougere, but it was kind of dark. It was kind of twisted. It was one of those fragrances that you smelled for the first time and you're like, what is this? You know, I can't explain why I like this, why I'm attracted to it. But yeah, I want a bottle. That's exactly how I felt. Lavender, oak moss, leather with a lot of green woodsy notes like pine, fir, juniper. There's some spicy elements in it too. I just remember this being one that when I began wearing it, I was just fascinated by the fact that it had like this underlying heat to it. It just kind of, there was like a heat that radiated off my skin when I sprayed this on. So I mentioned, you know, I had the two buddies that I hung out with. The one wore Obsession, while the other wore Drakkar. And he kind of claimed it as his signature scent. So for a long time, I didn't wear it. I didn't buy a bottle. You know, I finally did add it to my collection. I love it. It's an amazing fragrance. And it is still loved in 2020. Drakkar Noir. And we come to the very last year on this list, 1981. In 1981, Kim Carnes had the top song with Betty Davis Eyes. And old Indiana Jones was whipping his way through jungles, falling into snake pits, all in an effort to track down that missing Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Still an amazing movie. I still love that one. And also, a king was born that year, and I am talking about King Kouros. Yes. No matter what you think of this fragrance, whether you like it, you love it, you hate it, you're indifferent to it, it doesn't matter, because it definitely belongs on this list of truly iconic fragrances from the 80s. Yves Saint Laurent has always been a trailblazer when it comes to fashion, but that also applies to its fragrances as well. You think about opium, you think about how things were under the creative direction of Tom Ford when they introduced the very first mainstream oud fragrance. And Kouros is no exception. It is a masterpiece of masculinity. It definitely served as an inspiration for a lot of fragrances to come thereafter. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about Lapidus Pour Homme. You know, Lapidus is very similar to Kouros. It gives you that same type of feel. And it's definitely not for the faint of heart. It's got a very heavy civet note in it. And, you know, it's leather, honey, musk, oat moss, aldehydes, and a whole lot of other ingredients. Quite a lot going on in this fragrance, and it smells that way. It smells very complex. It's always interesting to hear people describe what they think Kouros smells like. And a lot of the descriptions are not very flattering. I've heard people say that it smells like a public restroom that really needs to be cleaned. Some say it smells like a urinal cake. And I can kind of see where they're coming from. That's the funny thing about this, but yet it doesn't put me off this fragrance. I still love it because it's just, it's an overall animalic kind of thing that either you love or you hate, you appreciate or you don't appreciate. That's what it boils down to. But whatever the case, kouros is king. 1981. And with that, my friends, we are going to conclude this little trip down memory lane, this trip back to the 80s. Yeah, I realized that I skipped a few years, I think 84, 83, and 80 to be exact. There were some great fragrances to come out of those particular years, but for the sake of this video, I just could not include all of them. And quite frankly, some of those might not have been my favorites. I might have tried them over the years, but not necessarily, you know, have had them in my collection. But in the off chance that I did skip over one of your favorites, don't be offended, but please let me know in the comments below what they are. As always, I really appreciate you stopping by, checking out the videos. I really appreciate the support. And until the next one, I hope that you will take care, and we'll see you soon.